Welcome creatures. Today is Thursday, and on this Thursday we have a slightly different type of change from Blizzard compared to what we looked at yesterday, because yesterday we were looking at the basically combat type of changes, we were looking at balance tuning, at tier set changes, we were looking at the 25% health and damage taken increase. Today, however, we have something quite different, because today we are looking at a change which is only gonna impact you after the combat is over. I'm talking about loot, I'm talking about gear, I'm talking about killing bosses and getting the sweets after. So, the sweets after in question are getting a change. Initially, the first part of the change is quite positive. The change is that it seems like, at the very least on the PTR, the loot window in which you can trade an item, if the item is tradable, has gone from 2 hours to 4. At first glance, this is a positive change. You just have more time to give out the piece of gear. However, there is a tiny little extra addendum at the bottom. The bottom says that it also includes offline time. So essentially, the moment you loot the item and get it in your bags, there is a clock that starts for 4 hours, regardless if the character stays online or goes offline. Now, why is this very relevant? In case you haven't really ever had to deal with this very often, most of the time you looted something, for example in Mythic Plus or in the raid, you got someone to whisper you, need, do you need? And then you give it out, or you keep it for yourself and that's it. Or maybe if you were in an organized raid, then you have loot council, the loot is being distributed already, so this system wasn't really that needed to be 4 hours long. I'm sure many of you have gotten situations where you loot something from Mythic Plus, you close the game, you go to something else, you go to sleep the day after, or even 2 days after, you log in again and you see that the item still has an hour left in the trading window because it wasn't counting offline and it wasn't that needed anymore. So the benefit of this 4 extra hour is mostly going to be for guilds who raid roughly 4 hours. If you think about it, it made not that much sense to make the loot window only 2 hours when most guilds raid from 3 to 4. This effectively meant that all of the bosses you were killing in the first hour to 2 hours of your raid needed to have their loot distributed before you ended the raid. So you couldn't, for example, clear all of normal if you were farming normal, all of heroic if you were farming heroic, and then only at the end, once you have all of the loot available, you could start to distribute it, because the loot window was only 2 hours. So changing the loot window where you can still trade stuff from 2 to 4 is overall very good for the majority of the player base. This will allow you to fix situations like, for example, there are 2 players, both players need boots, one particular type of boots is an upgrade for player A, the second type of boots is an upgrade for player B, but the second type of boots only drops at the end boss and the first type of boots drops from the second boss. So you kill the second boss, you get the boots, you kind of want to give the boots to the second player because he still deserves the gear anyways, even if it's not his best in slot, but because you have a loot window now lasting 4 hours, you can say, hey, let's just wait. Let's just wait to see if we get to the end boss, we kill the end boss and we drop the boots that he actually needs. If he loots those boots that he needs, he can get those boots, and the first boots we looted, we give them to the first player. If the last boss doesn't drop the boots, then we can give them the first ones we looted. That's a good system to extend the loot window from 2 to 4. It's gonna fix this type of problem for the majority of the guilds who raid the average time, which is 3 to 4 hours an evening. Where this change could be much worse and much more problematic is, of course, for all of the guilds wanting to be a little bit more hardcore, a little bit more try-hard, a little bit more competitive. So TLDR, the vast majority of the guilds below the top 100 and virtually every guild close to the top 50. So we are talking about guilds who will do things like splits, guilds who will do things like raiding much more than just 4 hours and evening, guilds who will do day raiding, afternoon raiding, guilds where raiding 6 or 8 or even 10 hours a day is much more standard. In case you're not part of those guilds or you're never been used to the way they play or they do things, one very common strategy, one very common play to be able to maximize loot is bringing an alt to a run, for example, of a normal farm or a heroic farm. For example, during a split, that character wasn't really gonna be getting any loot, so let's just bring him in to make number and then store all the loot on that character. We kill all of normal, we get all of the loot, we kill all of heroic, all of the loot. While the character gets the loot, he goes offline. Offline, the time does not tick down. So what we can do, for example, is things like do normal, get the loot on him, put him to sleep offline, then we do heroic, and once we have done all of heroic, we can bring the alt back online. The gear is still tradable because the time wasn't ticking down while he was offline, so now we can better distribute all of our heroic loot plus all of our normal loot. We can now min-max, we can now maximize way more the upgrades for the players, right? That was a very common style for guilds doing that. Another type of maximization could have been, for example, doing this before the reset. Maybe you raid on Monday or on Tuesday. What you can do is get the loot on a character, put him offline, wait for the reset, open your Great Vault, and then you can choose your rewards from your Great Vault based on the loot that you got. That is still tradable because that character is still offline. So you can get the loot from the Great Vault. Once players got their upgrades from the Great Vault, at the next raid you bring back that character who has stockpiled all the loot from the reset before, and you distribute that loot. All of this was only possible because the time for the window to trade the items was not ticking while offline. So this change is effectively making it better for the vast majority of the guilds, because the vast majority of the guilds are the guilds that raid only 4-ish hours at best. So increasing the window to 4 hours will make it much more normal for them to not have to worry about the time ticking down. You know, guys, we just killed the second boss or the third boss. Keep an eye out on the timer, because maybe before we get to the last boss, the timer will go down because the timer is only a couple of hours. Right now, with a 4 hours long timer, that's a problem that's gone. But of course, it will hurt much more all of the guilds who were looking into things like doing split runs, doing maximized, doing min-maxing try-hard runs, trying to give all of the possible upgrades in power to as many players as possible. Of course, in this season and the next season, given how important it has been to get a tier set piece, that's also what was good for. You could save all of your tier pieces. You could wait and see how many tier pieces are we getting. Let's clear all of normal, log off that character with all the loot, let's clear all of heroic with all of the loot, and then let's see how many tier pieces we have available. Let's play Tetris, or let's play a puzzle. Let's try to combine how many pieces we can give to certain players to give them however many set bonuses. That's something that was very helpful for those type of guilds at the start of the season, which now won't be nearly as powerful because of this change. Perhaps that's the intention, perhaps that's what Blizzard was aiming for with this change, trying to minimize the degen split runs of guilds, because now they know they can't hold onto that gear for that long anymore. Now they only have a 4 hours window. That's perhaps the reason why. We might still have, of course, the inventive of those type of players is always very high, so we might have some type of workarounds. For example, you might be killing the bosses, but not loot them. That's possible. You just kill every boss without looting a single one, and then only at the end you go back and loot them one by one. This should save you a few hours of time before actually getting the timer to tick down, because apparently the timer only starts going down, this new 4-hour countdown, only after you loot it. not from the moment the boss is defeated. So that could be something that these type of guilds might try to abuse, but at the very least, the intention of Blizzard seems quite clear. They don't want any more of this offline gaming when trying to distribute the loot from the raids. I have been talking, of course, mostly about the raid because this change is not really going to impact Mythic Plus that much, right? After all, if you're doing Mythic Plus is for yourself. It's quite hard to bring in an alt in your Mythic Plus keys and then log him off with the loot. So it's definitely less abusable in Mythic Plus compared to in the raid. Definitely the purpose of this change was raid focused rather than Mythic Plus focused. As mentioned, the TLDR of the change is, oh, please, won't anybody think of the race to world first guilds? While most of the other guilds will just be like, hey, cool, more time in our raid to give out loot. I dig it. So that's the TLDR. I feel like that's been the reaction from the community as well. Not really that into feeling sorry for top raiders wanting to try to abuse the system for distributing loot. So I don't think this will cause that much of an uproar for the majority of the community who is just fine with this change. This was the big point of news for today that's not really combat related, but when you think about it, a little bit of it is quite combat related as well. So with this change out of the way, which I'm thinking in the end will be seen mostly positively by the player base, it's time to leave each other once more on this Thursday. We thank, of course, first the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. You can still, however, support without having to spend any dime. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself, like YouTube demands. You can also support by following me over on Twitter or following me over on my stream on Twitch. So, with these social unpleasantries out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and hold on, in the meantime, finally, even in the morning, even at 2 PM, whatever, I still don't like that much light in my eyes. I need to maintain my silky smooth skin.